Shalom, Baruchim Habayim, and welcome to Shevim Panim the Torah, to 70 Faces of the Torah, and also Sulam Yaakov. This week's Torah portion is Parashat vaera, which means, and he appeared. Now, it's very similar to the term vaera, which we find back in the Chumash Bereshit, which is dealing with the Torah portion of HaShem revealing himself to Avraham Avinu. However, there is a slight difference in this week's Torah portion, in which HaShem reveals himself not just to Moshe Rabbeinu, but also to Israel, under the title that we call HaShem, also known as the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, the Shem Havaya, which also we substitute with the term Adonai. Now, mostly in English, we refer to these as names of God, but really they're not names, they are titles, referring to the different midot or attributes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so one of the things that Hashem tells Moshe in the beginning of this week's Torah portion, is that Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, they did not know God by the title Hashem, rather they knew him by the title El Shaddai, which deals with the midah of Givurah, or the attribute that we call severity, deals with a level of strict righteousness. And so here, the midah or attribute of Hashem is going to be used specifically through the makot or plagues that would be instrumental in redeeming the Jewish people from Mitzrayim. Now, I don't have time to get into a full breakdown for this teaching here, discussing that topic. God willing, maybe I'll be able to have some time this week to update it. I have a teaching actually separate from what I'm going to be sharing here today, which goes into detail, looking at the differences of titles. For today's teaching, I have subtitled this, Bringing Mitzrayim from Out of Us. Now, I explained in my teaching on Parashat Shemot that we have entered a auspicious time of the Jewish calendar that is known as shovavim. And if you did not watch my teaching on Parashat Shemot, please feel free to do so. Look at it after you take a look at this teaching. Shovavim is actually an acrostic that is composed of the initial letters of the names of the first 6 Torah portions of the book of Exodus. You have the Shin for Shemot, you have the Shavav for vaera, the Beit for Bo, the other Beit for Beshalach, the Yud for Yithro, and the Mem for Mishpatim. Now, as we read the Parashiot of Shovavim, I want to remind everyone that we are not just reading narratives that took place roughly over 4,000 years ago. Rather, we are reliving the themes of the Parashiot of Shovavim. After Parashat vaera, this week's Torah portion, there are approximately 10 weeks until we arrive at Pesach. What's that mean? Well, it means the spiritual rectification that we undergo over these next 10 weeks, they will help set the frame to our spiritual transformation. In other words, they are like the embryonic genetic coding that produces sparks of godliness within us. When you take a look at the biological makeup of a child, specifically in the formation of a baby, its identity is encoded at the very beginning when gestation takes place, meaning that the 23 chromosomes are basically developing in the child that come from each parent. Now, as humans, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, 22 pairs are number chromosomes, and also called autosomes, and 1 pair of sex chromosomes known as Y and X. Each parent contributes 1 chromosome to each pair so that the offspring will get half of their chromosomes from both their mother and their father. And so during these next 10 weeks, it's like a spiritual gestation period. There should be some development going on within us. And this is why it's important that when we consider the gestational period of Shovavim in this week's Torah portion, we are trying to extract information that we make applicable. We're not just reading a narrative about once upon a time ago in the history of the Jewish people, Moses and the Jews are freed, and that's not what we're concerned about when we study the Torah. We're concerned about extracting the divine information contained inside of the text, learning to make it applicable to our lives. Now, in regards to the concept of the gestational period in relation to Shovavim, it's very interesting that in the beginning of this week's Torah portion, when Hashem sends Moshe to the Jewish people to prepare for redemption, Hashem speaks about 4 stages of Geulah, or the 4 stages of redemption. We read here in Shemot, Exodus chapter 6, verse 6 through 7. Hashem says, Lachein emor livnei Israel ani Adonai. Therefore you shall say to the children of Israel, I am Hashem. Okay, that's very important within itself. Not just Ani Elokim, right? Ani El Shaddai, Ani Hashem. The midah of chesed, the midah, the attribute that can circumvent nature. While that's seen as a positive thing, it's not something that Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov had to depend upon. And that's just because their descendants are now entered, as Chazal explained to us, the 49th level of Tumah. God then goes on to say, V'hotzeti echem mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim. And I shall take you out from under the burdens of Mitzrayim. And we're going to break that down momentarily. After the second declaration, God says, V'hitzalti echem me'avodatam. Then I shall rescue you from their servitude. And afterwards, the third proclamation, V'ga'alti echem bezerua netuya uvishpatim gidolim. God then says, I shall redeem you with an outstretched arm and with also great judgments. And then the fourth and final proclamation of the redemption process, Hashem says, V'lachachti echen li la'am v'hayiti lachen le'elokim. And I shall take you to me for a people, and I shall be a God, literally a power to you. And it's interesting, I don't have it highlighted, but the Torah says, Vidatem ki ani Adonai Elohechem, hamotzi echem mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim. And we find a repetition in that verse, which we'll get to, but we translate that passage as saying, and you shall know. Vidatem ki ani Adonai. You shall know. Not you shall believe, and that's important, and I'll come back to this later on at the end of this teaching. There is no mitzvah to believe in Hashem. There's a mitzvah to know Hashem. That's important. And you shall know. This shall be a personal experience, that I am Hashem, your power, who takes you from under the burdens of Mitzrayim. I like to look at the 4 stages of Geulah as a metaphor that corresponds to the 4 trimesters of pregnancy. Now, what's important about understanding the redemption from Mitzrayim as a process of giving birth, is that when it comes to the first 2 parashiot of the Chumash of Shemot, or the book of Exodus, there are no mitzvot that are mentioned from Hashem to the Jewish people. You do not see that formula that we find over and over when laying the Sefer Torah, Vaydaber Adonai Moshe, Vaydaber Adonai Moshe, and God spoke to Moses, Lemor, Ve'amarta Alehem, say to the children of Israel, etc. We don't see that. There's no mitzvot. It's not until we arrive at Parashat Bo that the Torah then introduces mitzvot. Specifically, it starts with the mitzvah of Kiddush HaKodesh, which is the sanctification of the new month, the renewal of the moon. And we find that in Exodus 12, 1 through 2. Now, why is this significant? Well, when the Torah speaks about the 4 stages of Geulah, I want you to notice something, and I just pointed it out. We find a repetition, specifically in the phrase, mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim, that we translate it as God saying, listen, I have come to redeem you from under the burdens of Mitzrayim. Not 100% accurate translation, but it gets the job done. And we see it repeated. Why? Whenever the Torah uses superfluous language, it does not assume that we were not paying attention. It wants us to probe and investigate its inner meaning. Now, the word sivlot here in Hebrew, it comes from the word savlanut, which is from the 3-letter root sovel, which literally means to tolerate. Now, it's interesting, in the modern vernacular of the Hebrew language, savlanut literally means patience. It's used as an expression, when someone's like in a rush or they're eager to do something, and you have to tell them, Raga habibi, give me 1 second, Raga shni, legalot savlanut, basically be patient, okay? That's what that means. Now, depending on context, savlanut can have either a positive or negative connotation. When the Torah refers to savlanut in these 2 pasukim verses here, it's referring to the negative aspect of being tolerant. And this is mind-blowing. When Hashem says that he's going to mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim, redeem us from the burdens of Mitzrayim, it means he's going to redeem us from tolerating Mitzrayim. What this means is that as long as we tolerate the darkness of Mitzrayim, where we identify with the culture of Mitzrayim, we are irredeemable. Now, don't get it twisted. Mitzrayim is not limited to North Africa. We're not concerned about the geographical location of this narrative that took place over 4,000 years ago. As a Torah portion that has no mitzvot, the main substance of this week's Torah portion focuses on Pharaoh making his heart hard towards Hashem after each plague is basically is befalling Egypt. Now, the more plagues that are unleashed upon Mitzrayim, the more Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He hates Hashem even more. Now, you might think for a second, couldn't the Torah, for the sake of time, told us that after all the plagues were unleashed, that is when Pharaoh allowed his heart to become fully hardened against Hashem? Why is it that we have to learn after one makkah after another makkah that Pharaoh's heart continued to grow increasingly hard? For what? At the end of the day, the guy was very arrogant. He was very prideful. He was a Baal Gaiva. What do we need to know? I mean, why does the Torah have to record in detail after each plague that this guy had a hard heart? Albert Einstein, he defined insanity as doing the same thing over and over while expecting a different outcome. So why would Pharaoh continue to harden his heart if the outcome was going to be the same? Many of us have heard the expression that you could take a person out of a certain location, but you can't take that location out of that person. And that adage fits differently for everyone who grew up in different places under the sun. For the Jewish people, it was not enough for Hashem to take them out of Mitzrayim. He also needed to take Mitzrayim from out of them. When the Torah repeats the insanity of Pharaoh hardening his heart after experiencing each plague, it's coming to teach us that as long as we are willing to tolerate bad attributes, bad habits, we are nothing more than a personification of Pharaoh. We are looking at an image of ourselves in this week's Torah portion. How many times does Hashem have to send us a message that when we refuse to listen to the message, we end up experiencing some type of, unforeseen circumstance, a tribulation per se? And as we experience that tribulation, what do we tend to do? We cry out to God. We try to get serious in prayer. We try to make up some fake bargaining deal. I promise to be more faithful, to observe you, to be more faithful in observing mitzvot, etc. However, instead of obeying Hashem, what do? We continue to disobey Him due to the arrogance of our ego. I would like to suggest the reason why the Torah does not introduce any mitzvot until Parashat Bo, specifically beginning with Kiddush HaChodesh, which I'll get to in a second, and why that's interesting, is that unless we are no longer willing to tolerate the forces of Mitzrayim within us, pride, anger, unforgiveness, lack of faith, greed, lust, etc., we are not worthy to experience the liberating power of Torah mitzvot. Because you can hide behind religion while having bad midot, and what that's going to do is destroy the spark of your soul. That phrase is not limited to something happening 4,000 years ago of a group of people coming out of Egypt. Yitziat Mitzrayim is about Hashem taking Mitzrayim from out of us. This is why it's no coincidence that the very first mitzvah that Hashem gave to Klal Israel is none other than Kiddush HaKodesh. And He gave it to them specifically in Mitzrayim, as we read here in Exodus 12, 1-2. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe ve'al Aharon. Hashem said to Moshe and Aharon, Be'eretz Mitzrayim. And like the Torah has to put an emphasis on that, in the land of Mitzrayim. Even though we know the Jews were literally in Goshen, right? A suburb to Mitzrayim. But Mitzrayim is not just limited to a locality. It's a state of conscience. Be'eretz Mitzrayim lemor, saying, HaChodesh hazeh lachem rosh Chodeshim Rishon hu lachem lechodshei Hashana. This month, meaning Chodesh Nisan, also sometimes is called the month of Aviv, shall be for you the beginning of the months, the starting of the Jewish calendar. It shall be for you the first months of the year. We see here once again the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh was not given in Eretz Israel. It was not given in Har Sinai. Rather, it was given in a place of bondage in Mitzrayim, in a place of restriction, of limitation. Kiddush HaChodesh captures the power of renewal. That's what that means. Yetziat Mitzrayim must be engaged on an ongoing basis because there are different levels to coming out of Mitzrayim. There's different exiting levels. When we study the characteristic traits of Pharaoh, what do we see? If you simply see some type of megalomaniac, dictator, tyrant who lived over 4,000 years ago, then friend, you are not properly connecting with the Torah. The stubbornness of Pharaoh, the inability to recognize the authority of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a reflection of us. HaShem wants us to become diametrically opposed to the attributes of Pharaoh. Another reason why the Torah goes to great lengths to record the insanity of Pharaoh is that there is a warning in between the lines about losing our bechira, our ability of free choice. When a person refuses to recognize the sovereignty of Hashem, meaning they refuse to make themselves subservient to do shuva before Hashem, Hashem will give that person over to the power of their Yetzer Hara. And this is where all types of havoc will be reaped in their life. David HaMelech, when composing a part of the Psalms, recalled the exodus of the Jews in the wilderness, in which he recalled how Israel refused to listen to Hashem. And so Hashem gave them over to their fantasies, gave them over to the impulse of their evil inclination. We read in Sefer Tehillim, Psalm 81, 12 through 13. And we read this every Thursday morning as the Shir Shel Yom, the song of the day for the 5th day of the week. V'lo shema mi lekoli v'Yisrael lo avali. God says, but my people Israel did not listen to my voice. Israel did not desire me. So what happened? Va'asher lechechu bishriru libam yelechu b'moat sotehem. So I let them follow their heart's fantasies, that they might follow their own counsels. I let them follow their heart's fantasies. The Yetzer Hara could conjure much fantasy in the minds of man, especially when circumstances don't go according to their understanding of life. And when Hashem throws us a curveball and we are trying to blame the government, the economy, our mother-in-law, whatever the case may be, we fail to recognize that Ein Ol Mavalo, there is no other reality outside of God. Everything is coming from Him. And so because Israel failed to recognize Hashem's power, recognize what He's doing, God says, very well, I gave them over to their own imagination, their own fantasy, their own counsel, and the rest is history. In my teaching on Parashat Shemot, I explained that when the Torah described the Jewish people's descent into Mitzrayim, I mentioned that they were descending in the present tense. And I'll go back to that verse for those who didn't pick up on that. Ve'eli shemot bnei Israel, habaim Mitzrayim. These are the names of the children of Israel who are coming to Mitzrayim. It's in the present tense. Et Yaakov ishu ve'tov ba'u. Each, with Yaakov, each man according to his household came. Why is the Torah using present tense? Why not past tense? The Torah is teaching us Mitzrayim is not limited to a certain locality that took place in the past. That's not the focus. And I want to point out again that the word Mitzrayim comes from the word Mitzar, which means narrow, which refers to being in a state of restriction. And from Mitzar we get the root Sarah, which means to tie up, to be bound, which comes from the two-letter root of Sadi Resh Sar, which means a strait, a trouble, a very narrow difficulty. And so this has no reflection about the actual location called Egypt, even though if the Jews being there, it's much more than a physical place. The name Mitzrayim reflects the spiritual meaning of it. And so according to the Torah, every day The soul descends into the metzar of the body, into the matrix of this world, the restriction. And people are restricting their soul, their spiritual growth. In the Haggadah, we read that there's an obligation that everybody needs to regard themselves as coming from out of Mitzrayim. Bechol dor vador chayav adam lerot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa Mitzrayim. And every generation, it is one's duty to regard himself as though he personally has yatsa, gone out, exited mi Mitzrayim, from Mitzrayim. Not just coming out of the geographical location we call Egypt, but in every generation, a person's obligated to see themselves coming from out of a state of restriction. Now, when speaking about the future Geulah, the collective redemption of Am Israel, the Navi Micah, he says here in chapter 7, verse 15, as in the days when you left the land of Mitzrayim, I will show you wonders. That's very interesting when you look at the vernacular in this verse, specifically in the Hebrew, because the English, you're losing 85% of the context. It's fascinating that the Navi did not say, Ki yom seitecha me'eretz Mitzrayim, which we would translate literally as the day you left Mitzrayim, Ki yom. Rather, it says, Ki me seitecha Mitzrayim, as the days when you left the land of Mitzrayim. Okay, what's the difference? Well, why would the prophet say Ki me versus Ki yom? Well, according to the Torah, the Jewish people left Mitzrayim on the 15th of Nisan. Yetziat Mitzrayim, once again, is not limited to HaShem taking the Jewish people out of this location we know as Egypt. That's not the primary focus. It's about HaShem taking Mitzrayim from out of the people. And therefore, just as a person descends into Mitzrayim every day, they must also ascend from out of Mitzrayim every day. They must have an aliyah, an ascension. Since there are many facets to Yetziat Mitzrayim, there's different levels, there has to be many instances where the Torah presents a clear understanding that Mitzrayim is not limited to a location in Africa, but that Mitzrayim is a state of consciousness, it's a state of mind. Now, when we study the character of Pharaoh, we learn about our own frailty. We learn that Pharaoh's inability to recognize Hashem is related to the plagues. Why? Why the plagues? What was it about the plagues that made Pharaoh deny HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The reason why God revealed himself to the Jewish people under the title HaShem, which was also the title that was used to harden the heart of Pharaoh after each plague, it was due to the fact that Pharaoh's inability to recognize the Creator under this title, this midah, this attribute that we call chesed, is what angered him. It made him upset. Because Pharaoh didn't deny that there's a borei, a creator. He believed in one, even though he believed in a plethora of gods, a pantheon of sorts. What he could not understand was the Jewish concept of the creator. Specifically that the creator reveals himself through different fractal lenses of these different titles. Specifically one that can intervene and supplant the laws of nature, because to Pharaoh, the concept of a deity was limited to the forces of nature. And this is very interesting because Pharaoh believed in what the Hebrew we call Elohim, even though it's a singular plural title for the creator, singular two-letter root, aleph lamet el, then the plural pronoun him or him, which is basically means power over them. Hashem is the power of all powers, as how the Ramban breaks that down. He had no problem understanding that, even though he doesn't understand the source of those powers. Okay, he believed in other powers. Anyone who studied the theological system of Egypt, you understand what I mean in that sense. There's no denying these other deities per se. He couldn't understand the concept of HaShem. That was completely foreign. And it's also without coincidence that when you take a look at the title Elohim, it has a gematria numerical value of 86, which is the same numerical value with the Hebrew word hateva, which literally refers to nature. And what did God do during the 10 plagues? What did he use? He used nature. Okay? He circumvented nature in a way that the fathers, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, never saw. That's why God told Moshe Rabbeinu, Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, lo yadati HaShem. They didn't know me by HaShem. They only knew me by El Shaddai. They only knew me by that title. Because the Avot, they were not at the lowest level of Tumah like the descendants, and therefore they did not need HaKadosh Baruch Hu to manipulate nature for them. They didn't have to depend on God's grace per se. They earned their righteousness. Okay, Abraham walked before HaShem, as the Torah tells us. And so their descendants are at a lower madriga, a lower level. And so God is using nature to reveal his judgment. However, the Torah tells us that when these plagues happen, it was with the title HaShem that the Creator used to manipulate nature. Now that's mind-blowing because Chesed is the opposite of Givorah. How could Chesed be used to perform an act of destruction? But it was also simultaneously used as an act of protection for the Jews. And this is what made Pharaoh infuriated. To have a deity that can manipulate nature in order to intervene on behalf of a specific group of people was a ridiculous concept to Pharaoh. Because to Pharaoh, it would be insulting to insinuate that the Creator was intimately involved in a person's life, something in Hebrew we call divine providence or hashgacha pratit. Hashgacha pratit is based upon the principle that everything we experience in this world is directed by the divine will of the Creator. Pharaoh did not ascribe to this concept. He believed, like many people of his day, that a person's mazel, their lot in life, was based upon the system they were born under, the mazel, the constellational sign. That would determine their environment they were born into, the economic situation they were born into, etc. So let's give an example that if a person was born into, let's say, extreme poverty in a third world country, specifically in a broken home in which they only had a single parent, well, the reason why that person is born under those circumstances is because nature dictated that person to be born in those conditions. That was the divine will of the Creator or creators. Now, even though HaShem, yes, he also oversees that part of some people's struggle. The difference with Pharaoh is that when a person's born in that circumstance, they can't change it. That's their lot for life. They can't change it. You have this Moshe Rabbeinu who comes from these outcast people that are considered a caste, in a castrate system, a lower class of citizens in Mitzrayim. He's adopted into the house of Pharaoh, given a chance to have an upbringing, but he blows it because he kills a Mitzri, right? Kills an Egyptian for basically beating on a Jew. He flees, comes back at the age of 80. He's all to conquer, but yet with much vigor like a 20-year-old. And Pharaoh's disturbed. You're telling me that I have to release your people to go worship their Creator, and that he's going to intervene manipulating nature when they were destined to be born in this life of servitude, that they're destined to live a life of bad habits, that he's going to somehow intervene. And that's ridiculous. That's preposterous to say such a thing, to even think of such a thing. It's not possible. So Pharaoh cannot understand how the title HaShem was associated with change in natural circumstances in a person's life. This is powerful. He cannot understand how everything in life is governed by this system of the Godhead, let's say it that way. When Hashem gave the Aser HaDibrot, the intimate rendezvous in which he velachachti, the last proclamation of the 4 steps of Geulah, in which he took on Israel under the chuppah of Mount Sinai, the marriage process, we see that the very first utterance of Hashem to Bnei Israel is that he redeemed them from Mitzrayim. Exodus 20, verse 2. Anochi Adonai Elohecha asher hotzeticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim. I am Hashem your God, your power, who is taking you from our land of Mitzrayim, Mitzar, from restriction, from the house of bondage. Now it's fascinating. You're on this 50-day journey from Mitzrayim. You experience the Kiryat Yam Suf, the splitting of the Red Sea. You experience divine miracles of water and manna falling for you. And now you're about to experience the revelation, the mystery of the creator of the universe. And you're at the foot of Mount Sinai. And as an introduction to you, God tells you, I've taken you out of Mitzrayim. You would think that this is the creator. HaShem would have actually introduced himself by saying, hey, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, Asher bariti et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. I am the creator. I created the heavens and the earth. Okay, good, because there's a lot of these self-proclaimed deities in Mitzrayim. They had their own hashkafa and things like that. Okay, this is the grand introduction of the Rabbono Shalom. But that's not what Hashem does. Hashem does not introduce himself that way to Israel. He introduces himself by saying, I am Hashem, your power, who is taking you from out of the land of Mitzrayim. I would like to suggest the reason why the Aseret HaDiberot opens in this manner, with Hashem saying, I have Hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim, taking you from out of Mitzrayim, Mibeit Avadim, from the house of bondage, is that Hashem wanted to show Israel how intimately involved he is in our life. He is involved in all the minutiae, the small details that you and I think are problems. When we go through our trials and tribulations, unforeseen circumstances, we don't understand why this is happening, why that's happening. We fail to recognize that Hashem is the one who engineers, orchestrates everything. Even if we got ourselves into a predicament, Gamzule Tova, even that will work for our good, because Hashem will use it to our benefit, not to our detriment. Chas v'chalila. Yetziat Mitzrayim was accompanied by Hashem, not an angel. Hashem manipulated nature on behalf of Israel. And sure, Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, they never had to experience God in that manner. Not to say that one should be completely dependent upon God's grace, per se. But Israel fell to such a low level. This shows you the desire of God to be intimately involved with his creation. And so Yetziat Mitzrayim began a new era of the awareness of Hashem, not only as the creator of the world, but also as the father of creation, who desires to be intimately involved in the lives of his children. Hashem supervises and directs all events and circumstances in man's life for his ultimate purpose, of why each individual was sent into this world. Prior to Yetziat Mitzrayim, mankind believed that Hashem ruled the world through the powers of nature, just as Pharaoh believed. However, the events of Yetziat Mitzrayim teach how Hashem transcends nature. And it is the foundation of the entire Torah that we must believe in the Creator, not only as Elohim, as the power over nature, but also as Hashem, who runs the world through his hashgacha pratit. And that means that if we lack this understanding, our emunah, our faith, is not a complete faith. It's blemished. There's a pagam involved. Now, some of us, when we hear that the Torah, and this week's Torah portion, comes to warn us about the character flaws of Pharaoh, meaning that Pharaoh's characteristic flaws are nothing more than a microcosm of our ego, some of us may strongly disagree with that, because according to our personal philosophy, unlike the historical Pharaoh, we believe in Hashem. We acknowledge the Creator. Okay. The question I'd like to present before us all, if we truly believe in the midah, the attribute of Hashem, the very title that's used in this week's Parashat that Pharaoh was in denial of, then why are we trapped and restricted in the realm of nature? Why are we allowing the natural realm that we exist in dictate our emotions and our mental state, our personal health? If a person is upset that they might not be able to pay all their bills due to the economic recession that the world is actually on the collision course with, light bills are going through the roof, gas bills are going through the roof, water bills are going through the roof, mortgage and rents are through the roof, grocery bills are through the roof. Everything is going up. And so a person that may be upset about that economic outlook, why does such a person limit their parnosa based upon working for another human being, working for a company, or working for the system? If a person's upset, well, let's say getting a $2,000, that instead of getting a $2,000 stimulus check from the government, they instead get a $600 stimulus check. Or with the current trend of the IRS that's happening in the US and all the changes in the tax laws, people may be getting back zero. Why are people depending on the government for their financial support? Why? When HaShem took Israel into the wilderness, there were no jobs. There was no government agency to go and collect unemployment from. None of those things existed. There was no Instagram, there was no YouTube, there was no social media. There was nothing that a person could sit there and try to, put an act on for the world, for people to buy into their persona per se. If a person is afraid that they might, let's say, contract the latest lab-created virus, okay, because they fear having a health complications in wake of what the world has been going through for the past couple of years, then why do they place their health in the hands of fear and the medical agencies of the world instead of HaShem? Havarim, the reason why many of us personify Paro and struggle to depart from Mitzrayim is because we tolerate bad habits. We tolerate negative thoughts, bad attitudes, negative emotions. We tolerate shortcomings. Once again, the Torah said that HaShem had a desire, and it repeated itself 2 times over, mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim, to redeem us from tolerating Mitzrayim. Tachat is under, sivlot, sever, tolerate, Mitzrayim, mitzar, restriction. God says, I'm coming to take you from underneath the restriction of tolerating crap, shtuyot, BS, call it what you want. God says, I'm coming to completely redeem you from that, to renew your mind. Kiddush HaChodesh is a renewal. Renewal, engage. Every single day you wake up, the Yehezqel Italqi is talking about you're in a limitation, you're paying check to check, you're this, you're up to your neck. It's hard, why do this, why be happy? And you have to push yourself. You have to see yourself. You have to speak. You have to change the energy in your home, in your car, in your workplace, wherever it may be. And you have to constantly go against the negative energy that you have created through your thoughts and your words. And that's the reason why people sometimes feel a struggle. Because it's like, a resolutioner. I'm going to go to the gym. So for the first 2, maybe 3 weeks, they're committed. Then by the 4th week, they fall off the map. Why is it difficult? Because for all those years, you created energy, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. We're using bad habits of certain food intake and lifestyle. And now you're going to attempt to undo that in just starting with 3 weeks, 4 weeks even? No, you're going to have to keep going beyond that. So it's easy to give up. It's the same thing spiritually. When a person has created an environment of hostility, a negativity, a lack of emunah and bitachon in HaShem, as soon as they try to start changing, I'm going to speak positive, I'm going to speak words of hope today, I'm going to visualize myself in a better place and thank God in advance for changing my circumstance. Then reality comes knocking on the door. Oh, your light's going to be cut off if you don't pay X amount of dollars by this date. Oh, HaShem, why are you going to do me like that? HaShem will do us like that because he did it to Israel in the wilderness. As soon as he took them out, there's no water. The people are kvetching. They're yelling at Moshe, why did you bring us out here to die? Because HaShem wants to see what's in our heart. He wants to see how we're going to respond when he does not meet our expectations. And this is a part about taking us out of tolerating certain things that we have been conditioned to for so many years. HaShem does not desire for us to be limited to a state of tolerance. Once again, it's repeated 2 times because it's emphasizing HaShem desires mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim, to redeem us from tolerating negative things. And so many of us are like Paro. Instead of believing HaShem could change the nature of our life's problems and our circumstances, What do? We harden our hearts towards him. Our inner Pharaoh cannot comprehend. Why would HaShem, why would the creator of life want to be so intimately involved with my life, with all my imperfections? And so we tolerate this attitude, and guess what? We make ourselves irredeemable. We don't think that some way, somehow, HaShem can open the door instead of being limited to, let's say, a 9 to 5 or check to check life. I can't get out of debt. I can't do this. Or I'm living with a certain medication because of my health. A person cannot believe or think positive enough that HaShem can change that within a split second, overnight. They do not believe that. We see that later on in this week's Parashat, when Moshe goes to tell the Jewish people about the redeeming message of God being involved in him, it says that basically the people couldn't believe him. It's an eye-opening statement the Torah records, Exodus 6:9. V'aydaber Moshe king el bnei Israel. So Moses went and spoke accordingly to the children of Israel, just as HaShem told him. V'lo shameu el Moshe mikotzer ruach ume avodah kasha. But they did not listen to Moshe. Why? Because of what's called kotzer ruach. We translate that as shortness of breath, and avodah kasha, hard work. What does that mean? They're out there, schlepping bricks around like people think. No, absolutely not. The word kotzer, it means shortness, but it comes from the root word katsar, which literally means to be cut down, which is actually related to the process of taking a sickle and going out and cutting and harvesting crops when they're cut short. And by the way, compared to using modern technology to harvest crops, that's a very exhausting thing to do out in the field. It's the old school way of harvesting crops. When the Torah says that the Jews could not listen to Moshe because they were kotzer ruach, it's not saying that they were short of breath because of physical work. No. Rather, in relation to the message of redemption that Moshe is relating to them, they were kotzer ruach because they had no emunah to depart from Mitzrayim. And that's why the Torah says at the end of the verse, ume avodah kasha, and hard work. What is hard? Oh, you better believe it's very hard for you up here to change your attitude when you conditioned yourself to think and act and talk a certain way for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. That's the dangers of getting old, is that we get set in our ways. It's very difficult when a person gets set in their ways because then they cannot be redeemed from out of that certain mentality. They have to renew their mind. That's the secret behind Kiddush HaChodesh. It's kasha. It's hard. Damn right it's hard. Because we are creatures of habit. And therefore, they couldn't believe, they couldn't accept. They're struggling internally. This is the plight of every human being that God is trying to redeem from out of Mitzrayim, or take Mitzrayim from out of them. The primary objective of the 4 stages of Geulah is to know the Rabboni Shalom. That is the primary. I'll go back to the verse, Exodus 6:6-7, specifically verse 7. Right there at the end, Vidatem, God says, Ki ani Adonai Elohechem, hamotzi echem mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim. You shall know that I am HaShem, your power. Not just your God, but your power. The one who powers you, energizes you, who gives you life, vitality, to take you from tolerating Mitzrayim. That's the source of your power, is the Rabboni Shalom. I want to stress on this verse, there is no mitzvah in the Torah to believe in God. I don't care if you get pissed off when you hear that. I believe in the Lord. Don't care. There's not a mitzvah. I could tell you I believe in unicorns. It doesn't matter. Who cares? There's no mitzvah to believe. There's only a mitzvah to know HaShem. Knowing is a greater understanding of certainty than a belief that a person is not certain of. The personal intervention of God acting under the title HaShem demonstrates that the creator of the universe desires to be intimately involved in our day-to-day affairs. Vidatem ki ani Adonai Elohechem. You must know that I am HaShem, your power, hamotzi echem, who is coming to take you, to extract you, mitachat, from under sivlot Mitzrayim, the tolerance of restriction. God says, I'm getting sick and tired of looking at you in this depressed state. the state of unbelief. Therefore, I'm coming to redeem you from out of that, coming to help you renew your mind. And this means that we may be in a very difficult circumstance. We may think there's no hope, life looks bleak, the odds are stacked against us. However, our trust in the Ribbono Shel Olam allows us to experience a supernatural redemption. Once again, Pharaoh's sitting there thinking, you were born under a certain mazel. You were born in a single-parent home, maybe a no-parent home, in a foster home. You were born in, you were born in Detroit, Michigan, right? On the wrong side of the tracks. You're from the hood, you're from the projects. You were born in Syria, Aleppo, Syria, war-torn country. And somehow you believe that HaShem could change your circumstance. You have zero education. You don't have a degree from this university, accolades from that university. Well, guess what? Yosef HaSadiq had neither or. And he was sold into Mitzrayim like human trafficking. And yet he rose as the most powerful person in the Egyptian government. What does that tell you? That HaShem could change your circumstance within an instant. It's all about the vibrational frequency that you were connected on, as I shared in previous teachings. The master of the universe operates at a higher level. But if you are at a lower level, like many of the Jews were, the 49th level of Tuma and purity, your soul's vibration is at such a low density, it only deals with the physical environment. It cannot transcend it. And so when one experiences the supernatural things of Hashem, they can see changes in the fabric of creation that make no logical sense. No logical sense. In other words, one day, a stage 4 cancer patient suddenly becomes cancer-free. The doctor is baffled. I don't get it. Doesn't make sense. This person had X amount of months to live. Suddenly they're cancer-free. They can't make sense of it. Or an individual who's on the verge of being homeless. They lost their business. They're going to have to sell everything. Suddenly, out of nowhere, they tap into a reservoir of prosperity. They hit the jackpot. Or a drug addict suddenly is no longer enslaved to the lustful desire of substance abuse. Somehow they completely quit everything cold turkey. Doesn't make sense. And so it's not enough to simply read about the divine intervention of Hashem in the Torah. It must be experienced. Everybody must experience V'ga'alti achem bezerua netuya, the redeem, outstretched arm of Hashem. And so the intimate rendezvous with the Ribbono Shel Olam solidifies the cohesive bond that Hashem is very much active in our life. But what if a person is struggling to experience Hashem at this level? They're genuinely, what if they're on the verge of being irredeemable? What if they have been given over to the hardness of their heart like Pharaoh? Let's face the reality. What if you have gone over to the dark side? Is hope lost? I'm reminded of the words of David HaMelech, Psalm 63, 2-3. It's also a wonderful niggin, a chant, in which it says, Elokim Eliata, Asher Charecha Atzmalecha, O God, you are my power. My God, I seek you. Nashi Kamalecha, Besarli, Be'eretz Yah, Ve'ya'ef Beli Mayim. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh longs for you in a parched and thirst land with no water. Kain ba kodesh chatziticha leot uzecha ukevodecha. And therefore to have beheld you in the holy, the sanctuary, to see your might and your glory. This is what David desires. This is what the desire of the soul is, which means even if you think that you have gone beyond rectification, tikkun, you're at a state of being irredeemable, chasas chalila, you cry out, just like David does in the Psalm. Redemption from the burdens of Mitzrayim must be a burning desire. Must be a burning desire. You have to feel it. You have to be in a zone. If Hashem would have issued mitzvot to the Jewish people while in a complacent spirit to tolerate their bad habits while in Mitzrayim, then guess what would have happened? They would have hidden behind religion and the Torah would have destroyed their soul, chasas chalila. That's why God didn't give them any mitzvot. He waited, and the first mitzvah he gave them was Kiddush HaChodesh, the mitzvah of renewal. In the place of bondage, of restriction, It's where you find HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's where you learn renewal. It's there, not over there, or when days are going to get better or better tomorrow. That's fantasy thinking. That's why, once again, God says, I gave them over to their fantasies in Psalm 81. It starts in Take Mitzrayim. And that means that you have to get to a place where you have that burning desire to cry out to HaShem, just as David HaMelech had done in Psalm 63. Sama lecha nafshi, kama lecha v'sarli be'eretz sia v'yaif belimayim. Your soul must thirst for Hashem. Your very being, your flesh, that your soul dwells in, must long for God in a parched and dry land with no water. No water is also a reference to the Torah. You all dwell in a parched land of physicality, this material realm of the matrix that is completely absent, conscientious of the Creator. That's why people struggle. They're ODing on drugs. They're trying to find meaning in other substances, and they can't find it. Why? Because the Creator is not there. The spark of holiness is not there. You can't find it in the money, can't find it in just getting healed quick, or find it in a spouse, or I'm looking for my soulmate. Can't find it. Those are voids. You can only find it via Hashem through His Torah. That is where the soul is revived. And so with that said, Chavarim, that's going to bring us to an end for our teaching on Parashat Vaera. Once again, this Torah portion is God appearing. How does God appear to us? Maybe He's trying to appear to you in certain circumstances you're going through, or maybe you don't see Him the way He's trying to reveal Himself to you. But don't become so desensitized to the ways of God that He's using circumstances, and I would say, and pretty much everyone in the world right now, people don't know what's going on. People are waiting for new political figures to come to power, that all their problems will go away. Don't put your trust in politicians or government agencies. That's not going to do you any good. Okay? It says Hashem told Zerubbabel through the vision of Zechariah the prophet, it's not by might, not by strength, but it's by the Spirit of Hashem. That is how we find victory and success. And so with that said, Chavarim, we come to an end. If our teachings or organization is a blessing to you and you'd like to donate, you can find the links directly below the video. We greatly appreciate your financial support. And if you have any questions pertaining to this Torah portion, please feel free to send me an email. I will get to those in the order that they come in. Until next time, Chavarim, may the God of Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov bless you and your family. Shalom and Kol Tov.